Good morning, my friends. This is Paul, and today's video was requested by Money Management, who asked me to make a video describing the differences between INTJs and INTPs. I figured I probably wasn't the best person to talk about that because I'm a dominant sensor, so therefore intuition is my bottom function, and so I probably wouldn't do a very good job of describing that heavy intuition. And also, I have quite a lot of mixed opinions on NT types, not to be confused with neurotypicals, which is sometimes used in the autistic community. And most of them aren't very positive. I didn't want the video to turn into an NT bashing session. So I figured instead, to simplify things, I would make the video instead talking about the differences between ITPs and ITJs. I originally wanted to do the difference between all TJ and TP types, but that turned out to be very confusing with trying to differentiate, like, oh, the thinking is up here instead of up here, and the thinking and feeling, it was just too complicated. So this will really simplify things a little bit for you guys. So for starters, let's talk about what they have in common. They're all introverted types, so that means that all of these types will prefer to recharge their energy by being alone or in a very quiet, tranquil type of setting. They might want to read a book or play a soothing video game or even just take a nap. They will also have a tendency to be a bit on the quieter side during conversations. They might only speak up when they're asked a question. They wouldn't do a whole lot of initiating unless there's a whole bunch of other shy people and someone's got to break the silence. And they're also all thinking types, so therefore that means that they're going to have a preference of logical reasoning and what is true, as opposed to what do they feel or what do others feel. However, the main difference between ITPs and ITJs comes in from the function stack. Specifically the judging functions, because depending on the S or the N, the function or the perceiving functions could be different. So ITPs have introverted thinking as their dominant function and extroverted feeling as their inferior, whereas ITJs use extroverted thinking as the secondary and introverted feeling as the tertiary. So ITJs are a bit more balanced when it comes to figuring out whether to use logical reasoning versus emotions. Some of them may even be mistaken for feeling types because their introverted feeling is tertiary. So they use it a relatively good amount, especially if you know them personally. You start to see it show up all the time. Whereas ITPs are generally pretty separated from their more emotional touchy-feely side because their introverted thinking and extroverted feeling are so far apart. But before we get into the difference between the far apart versus close together judging functions, let's talk about what the judging functions actually are. So ITJs use extroverted thinking, which is a function that governs the need to want to follow a lot of external logical guidelines to make decisions. A lot of them have a really good relationship with authority, and they don't mind being told what to do because they figure my reasoning's probably not good enough, so this person has the credentials to make sure that they're well suited to making a more objective decision. So a lot of ITJs really get along with their bosses. A lot of them really value constructive criticism because they want to be the best versions of themselves possible. So if the constructive criticism comes from a place of valid credentials, they're going to take it and use that for self-improvement. Also, extroverted thinking has a tendency to want to look at what is objective and factual and proven. They like to think about what is as opposed to what could be's. So a lot of times they're like, this is the truth and there is no way around it. Especially in the case of the ISTJs, they don't like the idea of moral relativism, although my INTJ best friend hates moral relativism as well, so it's not exclusive. But then we have introverted feeling. Every extroverted thinking type uses introverted feeling, so that'll make function stacks really easy if you're not used to them. Introverted feeling is the function that governs a personal moral compass, as I've heard it described. Introverted feelers put a lot of emphasis on their own personal values and their own personal feelings on things. So they often ask themselves, how do I feel about this? What are my own internal emotions telling me how to approach this situation? Unfortunately, ITJs have extroverted feeling in their blind spot, so that means that they don't often know how to read the room, so to speak. For them, it's very hard to know how other people are thinking or feeling or perceiving them. A lot of them might not take care of their hair when going in front of the camera, or I've seen some examples where they might constantly be looking down and fidgeting and not making a whole lot of eye contact because they don't see the point in presenting themselves that much. I remember when I was a child, I had to be told when to dress up because I was like, why does it matter what I wear? It's just clothes. So a lot of times they have to apologize later for accidentally offending someone because they're kind of a bit oblivious to social cues and others' emotional reactions. Although, if they've learned to like figure out what is socially expected of them, they can get into a bit of a control freak attitude where they get a bit affronted by people not being able to read the room. So, in the case of me, I've gotten to the point where I've really started paying attention to social norms and what is considered rude and what is considered polite. And so a lot of times I'm usually the one saying you really shouldn't say that because people will take that the wrong way. But not as forceful as the ETJs would do. Generally speaking, because introverted feeling is in the third spot for ITJs, they are, a bit more in touch with their emotions than the ETJs. But unlike those types, they're not suppressing their emotions or trying to downplay them. It's more so of they're reluctant to share those emotions. So they might not want to make a scene. They might want to cry on the inside and be raging and storming inwardly, but outwardly they present a very calm, almost robotic nature. Although you really shouldn't tell them that they're robotic because most of them would take offense to that because they're like, I have emotions. Even if I don't share them with you, it doesn't mean they don't exist. In the same way that wind still exists, even though you can't see it. ITJs often know exactly what they want. They often understand what it is that they need. And so they don't often fall into that crisis of what is it that I want? What are my own feelings? Because they're pretty darn in touch with them. Again, they just don't like to broadcast it all the time. And when they do broadcast it, it's usually one of two things. Either they really, really trust you, or they don't know how to read the room and they just blurt it out because they don't see it as a taboo thing. Now, as far as the ITPs, they use introverted thinking. Introverted thinking is very hard for me to describe because it's not in my function stack, but from what I've heard, it's the need for internal logical consistency. They say that they like to think about things objectively, but at the same time, they typically like to see if the logic that they're experiencing fits with their own internal logical framework. To me, it comes across as subjective logic, which is weird because logic is supposed to be the way things work. So how can you have an internal framework? How is that logical? It doesn't make sense to me. So if you ITPs want to explain that to me, that would be great. But from what I understand, ITPs like to constantly question how things work. They like to know, okay, let's take this apart and try to figure out, okay, what is this? How are we going to figure this out and break it down to its principles? So that's why ISTPs work really well with cars because they're able to look at it as kind of a system. They use introverted intuition in the third spot so they can kind of see the big picture of how the car works. ITPs also use extroverted feeling, which extroverted feeling normally for the types that use it higher up is the need to create harmony between different types of people. They like to think about other people's needs over their own and think, how can we create a scenario where as many people are happy as possible and where maybe people of different viewpoints can get along and have a harmonious outcome. Since it's so low for them, they often have a reluctance for crowd pleasing and oftentimes will make very interesting wording and social choices because they're not as in tune with what it is that people want and what it is that makes people uncomfortable. Although recently I have been talking to more INTPs and I have noticed that if they've developed their extroverted feeling, they have a certain warmth to them that the ITJs and ISTJs lack. They're like, oh, how are you? How are you doing? Is there anything I can do for you kind of thing, but not like over the top like the FJs do. I give this example all the time in my Myers-Briggs videos, but just in case you're a newer subscriber, I'll say it again. I have an ISTP friend, and he certainly doesn't come across as a very touchy-feely person. But if there is something that I need and I can't think of anyone else to ask, if he's able to do it, which more often than not he is, he will do it, no questions asked, and he will do whatever it is that needs to be done. So for example, back in 2020 was when I had to move to this current house, and I don't really like a lot of loud noise and chaos. So I asked if he would be willing to help out with the moving while I stayed the night at my best friend's house so that I could be more in a quiet, tranquil atmosphere. And no questions asked, he just said, okay, sure, I'd love to do that. He also has a tendency to point out when I make a seventh function extroverted feeling blunder and say something that might be construed as sexist or racist because I'm just seeing things as they are, but he's seeing things as, uh-oh, this could cause disharmony, so better back it up. For example, one time we were just talking about Asian people. I don't remember the full context of it. And I think I just made a comment about their eye sockets and how they tend to be a different shape because, I don't know, that's how Asians are, I guess. And he saw that as potentially construed as offensive and racist, which I didn't understand because I was like, how is biology offensive? It's just how a person is built. It's not like it's a character flaw, but I don't know. I guess some people are sensitive about their appearance. And he also would always buy me an apple juice whenever we and our other friends would go out to Bigby's and just hang out. So I think that was his way of, one, wanting to save me money, and two, he knew that I was always thirsty and didn't always want to go to Bigby to eat, that I would want to go to hang out with my friends, that otherwise it would be difficult to do that. But I think he also didn't want me to feel like I was the only one not eating. So he's like, well, if you don't want to eat anything, then at least have an apple juice. Or more specifically, Bigby's is a place that prides itself more on its drinks than on its food, and everyone else would always be a coffee drinker, and I don't drink coffee. The main reason why is because it actually has the opposite effect on me and it makes me sleepy. The only time in the history of ever that I ever dozed off when someone was talking was that day that I had highly caffeinated coffee. So I've just since given up on it. So he would buy me an apple juice that I'd have something. I figured that that's something an ISTJ or an INTJ wouldn't necessarily think of doing because their extroverted feeling is all the way over here. So a lot of times you have to be very direct with them to make sure that they get it. Even then, sometimes they'll argue if it's not very practical. Like, I might ask my INTJ best friend for a favor, and he will have to be like, okay, I see it as working. But he'll often have to cross-examine his own personal comfort levels to realize okay, that'll fit in with my agenda well enough. Now, one thing to keep in mind about ITJs and ITPs is that the introverted types are actually mislabeled in the J and the P because socionics categorizes them according to their dominant function. So ITJs should be ITPs because they lead with either introverted sensing or introverted intuition, which are perceiving functions, which means they're functions that involve taking in, observing, figuring out, oh, okay, I am gathering information and making decisions about it later with my judging function. Conversely, the TP types or the ITP types are going to be leading with introverted thinking, which is a judging function, which means it's all about enforcing and creating a system. And it's a bit more outward, although in the case of the ITPs, it's more of an inward, what does this all mean? What is logic? What is the ultimate truth? And so as a result, it can lead to the ITP types being a bit more, say, forceful and stubborn than a true perceiving types, which are the EP types. And it can lead to the ITJs being a bit more laid back and relaxed than the EJ types, which are very dogmatic and forceful about everything. But at the same time, Myers-Briggs categorizes these types based on their secondary functions. So ITJs, having extroverted thinking relatively high up, they like their structure and they like their routine, and their extroverted thinking makes them want to manage their schedule in such a way that it makes things as efficient as possible. They'll try to think about what is the best method of solving this problem that's going to be time efficient, energy efficient, money efficient. Usually TJs are really good with their money. TPs, on the other hand, can have a bit of a reputation for being a bit lazy and not like wanting to prioritize quick action. They want to take things at their own pace, which is why the TP types always have a perceiving function in the middle. So a bit more of an emphasis on, I'll figure it out when I figure it out type of approach. But they're considered perceiving types because their secondary function is either extroverted sensing or extroverted intuition. So in the case of the INTPs, their extroverted intuition likes to brainstorm new possibilities and new ideas of what could happen. Sometimes it's really outlandish possibilities that haven't been proven yet, but they still want to think about it because it's fun to entertain these new ideas. And the ISTPs, using extroverted sensing, are looking at external, immediate access to whatever is right in front of them. So they're usually very in tune with like their hands and being very hands-on with everything. They to a certain extent they have a sense of adventure to them, but unlike the INTPs where they're thinking about new ideas and new possibilities, they like to think more about what's actually tangibly possible. So they think more about like what is actually possible, not a possibility, not a maybe, but is. So ISTPs might really like partying. They might really like drinking. They might have a tendency to be overweight because they lack the discipline that the TJ types do. And I guess that's another thing that I guess is a general difference is that ITJs are usually very well disciplined. Usually most ITJ types are very, I don't want to necessarily say aware of their bodies, but they're usually aware of like what's been proven to be like healthy or effective. So like most ISTJs, for example, are like health freaks and they're like very aware of this will make me overweight and this is the type of schedule that I need to make sure I'm this weight. And so they're all about optimizing everything. INTJs have a bit more trouble with that because they have sensing as their bottom function, so they can be a little bit oblivious to what's going on around them. But at the same time, my best friend has a very strange diet that I don't even know how to describe because I have literally never met anyone with as crazy of a diet as him. And he follows it rigorously. You try to suggest like, just one day won't hurt. He's like, no, I have to follow this to the T because otherwise I'm not going to be healthy. And he's like very rigid about it. Whereas I don't think an ITP would do that. I think they'd be more likely to be like, whatever, it's not going to kill me. So generally speaking, ITPs are a bit more easygoing and ITJs are a bit more structured. But at the same time, ITPs are a bit more into like observing and being slow to take action, whereas the ETPs are more about rushing into things. Conversely, ITJs are often described as the soft variations of their ETJ counterparts, not necessarily constantly trying to control everyone and be bossy and the top of the corporations. They're more content with being a follower than a leader. They're more content with observing first, making an action later. I've actually heard that they are one of the few types that can actually catch an EJ off guard because they're like usually very quick to take action and like have kind of a snap judgment reaction. And ITJs can say, yeah, you forgot to consider this factor in your hurry to quickly get to an outcome. They're like, oh, shoot, I totally forgot about that. So it's nice to know that they're not these perfect godly beings that have absolutely no flaws as they try to pretend that they are. I think I've covered just about everything. If you are the type that has a really bad memory, I'll try to summarize it in one sentence. ITJs have extroverted thinking and introverted feeling. What is objective? What is proven? What is statistical? What do I feel? What is my personal values? What are my personal emotions? Introverted thinking, logical, internal, consistency. What is consistently fitting with my personal, subjective, logical framework? Extroverted feeling. What does everyone else need? What are the needs of the group? And they're also, TPs are less structured, TJs are more structured. That's basically the gist of it. So with that, thank you very much for watching. Please let me know if you needed anything clarified and what you thought of the video. If you're a feeling type, how do you relate to any of this? Have you developed your thinking functions enough, or maybe you use it more consistently, and so maybe you do relate to these types to a certain degree? Let me know regardless, because I love reading and responding to your comments. Thank you very much to my Patreon supporters, Matthew Rakowski, Spoon Ghost Splatcat, and Scooter Doodles. You guys are really being a lifesaver right now. And until the next time, remember to keep the faith, stay epic, and God bless. Bye.